morning. Oh, no. Strategists, my people. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's up? How's everybody today? You doing well? All right, I'm here today. I'm going to talk about some stuff. By way of introduction, Tomasz introduced me. I'm Alain. I'm the founder and CEO of SYLVAIN. You may have heard of the company. We're a strategy and design consultancy. Started about 12 years ago, named after my egocentric ass. But we help companies think about big, wily challenges related to brand strategy and innovation. I worked in advertising agencies before. Think of it as like strategists. Strategists had their own company. You can check us out. We're about 85 people. We have 4 offices. We're based in New York. We have an office in LA and Amsterdam. We work with a bunch of companies. Right now, working with Apple on their podcast strategy, working with Nike to segment their global kids outreach. Super interesting work. Check us out if you're curious. Okay, that's enough of the commercial. I want to start with a story. Okay, this is Tri-City High School in Atlanta, Georgia. It came together when 4 different school districts sort of merged, and they had a lot of kids funneling into this one school in Atlanta. And there were two kids. There was Antoine Patterson and Andre Benjamin who met each other there, and they were sort of outsiders who used to like rhyme and rap at lunch together, and they were literally outsiders, and they named their group The Outcasts. Of course, many of you know who they are. Incredible hip hop group. Andre 3000, one of the best MCs in the world. They ended up, making this album, Speaker Box and Love Below, in 2004. And it was a smash hit, as you know. The song Hey Ya was like crazy. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't enter an elevator or like go to any party without hearing that song. And they killed it. They won tons of Grammys. They sold tons of records. And then actually the NFL asked the Outcasts to perform at the Super Bowl in 2004, okay? Outcasts bravely declined for their own reasons, and instead they had to find somebody else. You with me, right? This is a long story. Stick with me. They had to find somebody else, and they asked Janet Jackson to perform famously at the Super Bowl. And of course, you all know what happened. Her boobie slipped out, and it was like a whole thing, and it took the country by storm. And there were 3 tech bros who worked at PayPal at the time who wanted to see video of that moment. And they were talking about how, it's too bad there isn't a place where we can go find video, and they saw a gap in the marketplace, and you know what? They created YouTube. Those are the 3 people that created YouTube because of Outkast. Okay, so they created YouTube, and I don't need to tell you what happened after that. YouTube triggered a juggernaut. Many of us work with that platform. There would be no Justin Bieber if not for YouTube. There would be no Shawn Mendes. There would be no Tech Talks. It really is sort of the definitive platform, and you might say language in which we communicate as a culture. Following that, that triggered a bunch of other platforms, TikTok, Twitch, continue to name them, and there would be no Corn Kid if not for Outkast. Okay, so my point is that everything is interconnected, everything. Every little decision sort of sparks another decision, and a lot of people talk about this as the butterfly effect. The things that change the world are the tiny things. A butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazonian jungle, and subsequently a storm ravages half of Europe. So just think about all of us in this room right now. They're little gestures, little moments, eye contact, blinks, sips of water that will actually trigger another action, and another action, and another action that has potential to be seismic, a storm ravaging in Europe. We, as strategists, and the work that we do actually has tons of ripple effects. Every decision we make, every brief we write, do you put a period at the end of that bullet or not? That has an impact, and it grows and grows. And in many ways, we have many alternate universes based on the decisions we make. Alternate universes is all the rage in pop culture. I don't need to tell you. I hope everyone saw Everything Everywhere at Once, crazy movie. But we're sort of fascinated by alternate realities, and I am in my work, and I wonder if you are too. If you brief a team in one way, that will create creative work that goes in one direction and changes the company in one way, and then the consumer will consume that product in a different way, versus briefing that same creative team in a completely different direction. This is what I think about in our work, that everything we do is in fact a decision, and everything sort of creates this reverberation. Everything, every little decision you make as a strategist at the foundational point where you're representing the consumer and the business landscape has a foundational chance to reverberate throughout the economic cycle, throughout the consumer life. And in fact, every business, every decision they make, big or small, has so many implications. You know, it's related to investors, to employees, to the leaders, to their consultants, to their suppliers. Every decision, it's not small. These aren't small things that are really just about making money. These are small things that change reality, literally create a multiverse of realities. And I'll give you some examples. You know, when the people at Abercrombie and Fitch came together and had the idea of let's really hone in on this concept of beauty and project an aspirational perspective, a quote unquote aspirational perspective of beauty. You know, six packs, blonde dudes, surf culture. That, at the time, that seemed like a really interesting gap for them, and they saw an opportunity. But of course, that had a pretty dramatic ramification around the world. It actually impacted a lot of the standards of beauty. And there's this really interesting tweet. If you're in your mid-20s, I bet a lot of your current self-esteem has to do with what your relationship with 2006's skinny, low-waisted Abercrombie jeans fashion was. Because I was 12 at the time, and it was the pinpointed perfect window to absolutely ruin me for life. Like, when they were in the boardroom and they had that decision, which seemed like an interesting business opportunity, and maybe it was, maybe it created some real revenue for the company, they didn't realize that that one little decision had a seismic implication for millions and millions of women, let alone society at large and how women are projected in media. Or think of other examples. Technology is really key with this. You know, Uber might be a magical app, but there are tons of implications around what that does and how it represents people. The Strava app is an app that helped cyclists track their location. And it actually became really controversial because it was a way of tracking military personnel. And actually, you know, enemies of the state were able to see where the military were. They were able to see where these hidden bases were using the Strava app. It was a technological innovation that actually had a national security implication. Like, there's something really interesting about businesses and the way they reverberate. Zillow famously, you know, after the housing crisis, they started to realize their technology and their algorithm could predict the value of homes, and they called it Zestimates. The person who named that should be fired. That's like not. That's not, you know, our name starts with a Z, and we want to talk about estimates. Zestimates. Anyway, so and you know what they did? They ended up buying these houses and flipping them. Okay, so they knew that this one house was worth something and it was going to increase, and they bought it and they flipped it. They thought it was a genius idea, and they continued to do it. And then fast forward in COVID, just a few years after the mortgage crisis, people are really hard on their luck. Like thousands of people were impacted by their inability to buy homes, sell their homes because of Zillow's algorithmic kind of selling scheme. This is what I think about. This is what I think about. And I think about it in this particular moment where we are drowning in an array of issues. And you talk about them. You open it up with that. There's so many issues to think about. There's Roe v. Wade. There's the opioid crisis. There's healthcare. There's unemployment. That's, you know, the impending inflation. Recession. The issues are everywhere. And your colleagues, your employees, your bosses are thinking about it and also drowning it at work and beyond work. And my question is, where do agencies and consultancies fit in all this reverberation? That's the question. You know, great debates, hot takes. This is the question. Where do agencies, you know, where you work, in this array of connected links and all these flapping of wings of butterflies and Outcast and Strava app and Zestimates, where does your agency, where do agencies fit? What responsibility do they have in that link? And, you know, the agencies, there are many, and they wield tons and tons and tons of power globally. Literally $1 trillion of annual revenue collected by agencies and consultancies, professional services companies worldwide. That's a lot of money. So I think about that a lot. I think about what role do we as professional services fit in all that reverberation. And I think there's sort of three choices, which I'll get to in a second. But just to hammer home the point about agencies. Wunderman Thompson, by the numbers, huge, right? 126 years they've been around. 96 offices, 20,000 employees. McKinsey, 96 years of experience, 130 offices, 30,000 employees. These are companies that wield tons and tons of influence. But here's the thing. Agencies have agency. Agencies actually have choice. That's something that we don't think about. You might get a brief, you might get a client, but someone decided to take that brief on, and someone decided how we're going to approach it. We, as consultants, actually have quite a bit of agency, and these are the three options we have at any time a brief comes, whether it's a controversial one or not, a seemingly not so controversial one. I think the first, option A, do nothing. Do nothing, do the work, phone it in. Some people call it, on an employee level, some people call it quiet quitting, which is like a hilarious concept. Option B, reorient towards our duty, reorient to what we've been assigned to do and try to do it better than anybody. Option C, reorient to our values. So what do you believe? And all of our values are not the same, by the way, right? So all agencies don't believe and have the same values, but if you orient to your values, that's a different choice. So I'm going to go through each one, okay? So the first one, doing nothing. And I really think this is about being a bystander. I also have 3 kids, right? And in bullying culture in school, they talk a lot about not being a bystander, being an upstander. You see something happening, someone's getting bullied, stand up for it, don't be a bystander. But a lot of companies, a lot of agencies actually are just bystanders. They just sort of like, I'll be the lowest common denominator, least offensive possible. And that's actually rooted in primal neurology. Actually, it's rooted in our brain. The premotor cortex, when we're under stress, we kind of revert to this fight or flight instinct. And this kind of flight instinct is, in fact, about being a bystander. And it is like, you know what? It's too much. It's too much. I can't actually evoke the empathy or sympathy required for me to stand up and have an opinion in this particular moment. And a lot of companies face this pretty frequently. There's this agency in London called Richmond and Towers. You know the story. They worked on Alpro, which was an almond milk, which a plant-based dairy substitute. Seemingly an interesting, really important thing to introduce in this age of environmental turmoil. And in their work, that agency helped generate profit on behalf of Alpro and brought a lot of new people to that category, to that really burgeoning, interesting category. And what was interesting, the Advertising Standards Bureau in the UK challenged that campaign and all of that work because they felt that Alpro's promise that this is good for the environment, good for the planet, was actually not true because producing almond milk actually requires a consumption of water that's on par or close to that of traditional cow-based dairy. A lot of people don't know that. Almond milk is interesting because it's plant-based, but maybe not as responsible when it comes to the environmental impact. It's still better than dairy. But the promise of good for the planet is actually not 100% true when it comes to almond milk. And so that campaign kind of came to an end. And no one would have thought that, right? No one would have thought that this seemingly altruistic, virtuous effort actually had some issues tied to it. And we see it a lot. And I'm going to zip through a couple of examples. There's Innocent, which was found guilty of saying the same thing about being good for the planet. There was, Mercedes in Colombia got called out for greenwashing. Greenwashing is sort of what I'm talking about. You've seen it. It's like, we're all doing great. And I've been in many briefs where like, what's our cause? We need a cause. It's like, what? Like, you need a belief. You need a value. You can search this one site that where you can look at all the agencies that actually participate in companies that use fossil fuels. It's a great example. So this is all bystanders, companies that kind of don't do anything. The second example, accomplices. This is worse. Okay, you can do nothing, or you can actually further the agenda of your client without actually being critical about what it means or what it stands for. And to me, being an accomplice is actually quite dangerous. And the best example of that is, in fact, the opioid crisis. Purdue, their whole strategy was to sell opioids, of course, and their promise was that it's less addictive than other pain remedies or pain treatment. And that strategy was actually developed by McKinsey, the management consultancy. And I don't need to tell you the impact that we're continuing to live through that impact. 263,000 people died in the US from overdoses involving the opioid crisis. It's tragic. McKinsey, who developed that strategy, had to pay a fine of $600 million for their role in opioid crisis. Like, imagine you worked on that project, right? Like, McKinsey, this kind of bellwether of consulting, had to pay $600 million. Who knows all the other companies that also worked on that work? Who knows all the other moments in history where there have been companies that come in and out? Opioid got caught and had to pay. There are other examples. There's Bain in South Africa supporting the Zuma administration and its corruption. This is the Bain one. Then there's Epsilon that helped develop these schemes that targeted the elderly. There are agencies that are working with clients that are kind of promising kind of shady stuff. I don't want to call it any agencies, but those are the two. So bystanders, accomplices. The third is really about being a steward. And I'm going to try to zip through this one, okay? What I call a steward. And this is reorienting towards your values. It might be easy for me to say. It might be easy for me to say because my company is named after me and there's an entrepreneur who runs it and there's a person attached to it, so it's a little easier to maybe inject some values to it, but who gives a shit? You want to work for companies that have purpose. You want to have, you are in the midst of reverberation. You have a responsibility as strategists that are influencing all those nodes that I showed you, consumer life, supplier's life, the environment. We have a responsibility. We can't be bystanders, and we certainly can't be accomplices to the efforts our clients make without being more critical. Now, we don't get it right at Sylvain for sure, but I'm going to talk about how we approach it really quick. And forgive me, okay, because I couldn't think of a good example. So what we do, we actually developed an impact report last year, and you can check it out. So as advisors to the world's most powerful companies, we are very much stewards of the public trust. As such, it's our moral obligation to work with our clients to align the actions of decision makers in corporate America with the pursuit of social justice and environmental health. We're a for-profit company. We work with Nike, Apple, we work with Meta, we work with Amazon. These are very challenging questions, but we feel and are very conscious of what our responsibility is in those halls and when we get those briefs. We are very conscious of it, and we feel a great sense of moral obligation. Again, we don't get it right. We don't get it right, and we experiment. We try to see if we could change a company by 0.5 degrees so that nobody else does it, but we don't always get it right. And I want to give you one quick example of how that we did that. Any fans of the WNBA up in here? Woo. Thank all 4 of you. I really appreciate you. We have more work to do. But the WNBA years ago was sort of a sad imitation of what I call the MNBA, the Men's National Basketball Association. And they really didn't reflect the true essence of what the WNBA was, which was 85% black women who are these elite super athletes. They're also politically conscious, highly educated. A good share of them were gay or queer, but they were sort of treated as a sad imitation of the men's league. Now, in the midst of the reverberation, how would you change the WNBA? And that was our brief. It was how can we make more money? How can we get people more engaged, more than the 4 of you in the room? How can we further that brand? And so with this lens of moral obligation, and forgive me for being so self-righteous about it, but with that lens, we took that brief and decided what should the WNBA actually do, knowing that the mission is to inspire and empower women, knowing that the core audience, the players, gay, black women largely, what responsibility do we have? So we went out and we talked to all those women. We talked to academics. We went to all the key markets, talked to the women that were most influenced by these superstars on the court, and got a better sense of what they wanted for the brand, what they wanted the brand to represent. We helped them develop a business strategy. We helped them develop a brand strategy. We ended up developing an identity system, which is probably best reflected. This is the old one, actually. This image is supposed to move. This is the old one. So the old one you'll see is, looks like she's kind of wearing a skirt, which if you met these women they were like, what? Her hair looks like it could be straight, which does not reflect the players, right? It also, she's a little shorter and stockier. What we ended up doing is we developed a new identity. You can kind of see it on the upper right, the silhouette on the upper right. She's tall, she's statuesque, she's ripped. I met these women, they are insane. One of them, we talked about how they rock their hair. One of them said to me, I put my hair in a bun because I'm out there to fucking play. That's what she said. So we put a bun on the player, her hand is open, her cheek is up. And to be optimistic, our goal was to reflect the brilliance, unapologetic boldness of these superhuman players and put it out in full display. And we could have taken the easy road. We could have talked about, ESPN. We could have spoken the traditional sports bro language. But we felt, again, thinking about the reverberation, thinking about the responsibility we have to these black women, largely gay or queer black women in the world, and how actually representing them represents all of us and the promise we have as people to each other. That felt like the work that needed to be done, and we're really proud of what's come of it. They struck a new deal, there's a sweatshirt, the orange sweatshirt. I don't know if you've seen it, with our logo on it, which is killing, the highest selling merch item at the NBA. So how can we, as agency people, direct and influence our clients without addressing our own? And that's where that impact report I talked about came into play. And we developed an impact report last year, as I said. But before I talk about that, we're also a certified B Corporation. Do you all know what that is? Yeah, okay, yeah. So we got our certified B Corporation 5 years ago. Now it's becoming very commonplace. There were like 2,500 companies when we got it. We were one of 2 agencies or consultancies around the world that had it. We're super proud of it, but then we started discovering even that doesn't truly hold us accountable the way we want it to be. And we're trying to lead this. So that's why we did the impact report. That's why we went out there. And this is the impact report here. You can check it out if you're curious. And I'm going to give you a quick high-level sense of what we discovered, what it means for us to be more responsible as an agency. And maybe this applies to you, maybe not. You should develop your own accountability framework. This is our accountability framework at SYLVAIN. Again, 85 people, big clients. We feel like we have some responsibilities. The first might be obvious, just. Do we really address and accommodate the interests of all people, represent consumers well, represent everyone that's impacted by our client's business and our employees themselves when it comes to well-being and pay equity and so on. So just, we hold ourselves accountable to that. We measure that and track it. 2, open. Are we transparent and clear about the values we stand for and the work we're doing and why we're doing it? Do we include everyone into that mix like I'm doing now? I'm being very vulnerable and sharing something with you right now. 3, compassionate. Do we hold dear the lives of everyone that touches this work that we do, whether it's people that work at the company or people that work at our clients? 4, are we discerning? Are we thinking critically about every brief we get? And again, like I told you, I mentioned some of our clients that are questionable. But do we really investigate, interrogate whether those are projects and how do we do those projects? We always do that. We try to do that. 5, consistent. Do we permeate all those ideas across the entire organization every day? We're working on our next impact report now, really thinking about our place in all the reverberation and how we become stewards. When you become a steward, you recognize that you have just as much control as an owner, but a responsibility that's greater than yourself. And I have to apologize for being so earnest and so righteous, because we're also very fun. But if we're going to do this work, like, come on. Like, let's do this work. If we're going to be part of this reverberation, let's do this work. You can check out our impact report, our next one here, if you want. If you want to check it out, please do. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of StratFest.
Alain, we actually have a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind pausing.
I know you have time.
We got time.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Good. So when agencies cannot force or coerce their clients to take the action they promise or they should, what should an agency do to push back? Should they resign, issue a press release? What should they do? Yeah,
good question. To me, this is not about forcing or coercing clients. We are consultants, right? Our job is to help clients see the truth. And I put a lot of effort in that effort to influence, like trying to sway them. It's not about beating it down. And I've tried that and failed, and embarrassingly, I've had moments where I've been laughed out of rooms. It's really about helping them understand why you should look at something in a certain way. Now, if that fails, should you resign? Yes. Like, to me, you cannot have an agency or to be an entrepreneur, for example, without having the confidence to walk away sometimes. But again, it's like a relationship. You were talking about therapy, right? Like it's like a relationship. You don't walk away on day one, right? Like, you have a responsibility to try to make it work. You go to counsel, the equivalent of counseling, right? Like, you put in the work. It's too easy to be like, we're out the door, to be honest. I think quitting is too easy. Getting in the arena is what's hard. So that's how we look at that.
Another question, is there a difference between how a management consultancy and an advertising agency should respond in terms of responsibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately, no. Because advertising agencies, while in a very discrete discipline, is still part of the grander world of advising businesses. So I would argue advertising agencies are a type of management consultancy, number one. Number two, I do think advertising agencies have a unique burden because they are speaking to people. They are the touch point to people. They are the face. If you work for a media company, you are literally like the canvas that people are looking at. So that's a slightly different responsibility. It's maybe a little bit more overt. Management consultancies are a little bit more covert, which might make their responsibility even greater. I don't know.
How do you do this kind of work within the constraints of small budgets? The right research, everything else costs so much, and when clients won't pay, how do you do this kind of work?
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks. How do we do it? So yeah, we start with what we think this should be, and sometimes that's expensive. Sometimes it's not as expensive. Sometimes clients defer to certain tools that they've used over and over again because they know them, but they're actually not representative of the values that we think they should adhere to. So it's not always more expensive to do the right thing. But this is the conundrum in 2022 and beyond. What you're just talking about right here is the conundrum, because it doesn't only apply to budgets. If you're a business leader, how do you hire people that actually want to have an impact in the world? So younger generations are looking to work for companies that represent their identities and what they care about, right? Like, so how do you do that? And so all these decisions, budgets, hiring, they're sort of what the cost of doing business is in 2022. And so I think your question is more about, like, how do you compete? And for me, that means being scrappy when it comes to budgets. That means making sure we're not hiding our own beliefs so that we attract the right talent. That means discerning clients, looking for the right clients that share our point of view and are looking to change. I can tell you, Nike, who's probably our biggest client right now, and has a lot of issues when it comes to equity, when it comes to labor, they're very curious about changing. And so actually, they're open to spending a little bit of extra money. They're open to hearing a little bit more criticism. And that's how business is changing. That's how business is changing, I think.
Final question. Incremental change or go for the fences? Go big or go home?
Wow.
What's worked best for you?
Yeah. Oh, for me? I don't know. Man, I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't know about you. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think I think both. It's really about being adaptable in the environment. I can tell you, is Meta a sponsor of this event? No? Okay, I'll talk about Meta. All right, so I went to Meta and I was like, what? Meta? It's like, I'm gonna go for the fence. This is Meta is like influenced the elections, and we know so many things about Meta. Forget like where you sit on the political spectrum, but we're talking about Meta, like sort of the nerve center of opinions. And I went through that decision. Do I go in hot and like, or I go in another way? And I kind of came in a little too hot. And I realized that actually to change them, it's about baby steps. And they want to change. They do want to change. And actually with the right partner, with the right sort of advice, incremental change will actually change that company. And they're in the midst of actually very positive change. Unfortunately, it's not with me. Or fortunately, it's not with me. Fortunately for them, it's not with me. But I think it's about the client and what they want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.